Jordan and Gretzky, Serena and Ruth. Remembering great ones is easy to do.
But what about the no-names who spent their whole lives long-snapping footballs and catching sack flies? They're guys, remember that guy. Remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy.
They're just gonna remember some guys now.
She ties it with that one. This for college basketball history. She does it with a foul shot. Caitlin Clark becomes the all-time leading scorer in Remember That Guy, the show where we mine our memories for nuggets of nostalgia about peripheral players past and present. Hey there, folks. I'm one of your hosts, James, and I, like seemingly everyone else, love Jeremy Renner's MCU character.
It's a great character. Diaz with you once again. And we have a very special guest with us today. It's somebody who knows something about a little more climactic moments than Caitlin Clark breaking that record. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, you know what? It's me, the guy who decided to recast Edward Norton as the Hulk and make sure he never got to be part of the MCU, which was by far the most dramatic moment of my lifetime. But I think I made the right call.
Edward Norton, just going to put this out there real quick, Orioles fan. But no, Edward Norton never got to appear in any of the movies with Jeremy Renner's Hawkeye. However, I'm not even going to ask you guys what's making memories for you right now, because I just want to say we are all Hawkeyes right now. I want to give Diaz a big heaping help of credit, because you restrained yourself like a month and a half ago from saying anything. I mean, just the ability we have to ruin nice things. I think it was, 2 days after I mentioned Arshdeep Baines before the episode had even come out that he got optioned back from Vancouver to Abbotsford. We didn't say anything about Caitlin Clark. But now she done did it. I think we can say stuff about Caitlin Clark.
It's incredible. For it to be continuing the legacy of Iowa basketball that we've discussed at length on this podcast, and for her to be carrying that torch, and to honestly, in the game that she did it, I mentioned this in our Discord, she put up 35 points and played not great by her standards. Like, it was not anywhere near her best game she's ever played. And she scored 35 while setting the all-time scoring record. And it's not even like in her top 10 best games she's played.
She did. My favorite thing about the whole, this would have been a little bit sooner. My favorite thing about the whole Caitlin Clark pursuit has been Las Vegas Aces legend, Kelsey Plum, formerly the women's NCAA all-time scoring leader, had like a scheduled tweet ready in February to congratulate Caitlin Clark on surpassing her, because she assumed, she's going to definitely do it tonight. And she finished like 8 points short. This is a month ago, but it was just, again, we've done our best to not mention any of this because it's been the single biggest story in sports. And like, it is awesome to see woman's side of the sport be the number one story in sports since maybe the 2019 World Cup. Like, I was trying to think going into this tonight, what's the last time that like that was the biggest story in the sports world?
Well, and honestly, the way that I see this trend kind of going, I think this isn't the apex moment of women's college basketball. I think what we're seeing is the passing of the torch, because the men's college game, we're going to continue to see people, if they're not one and dones, they're going to go to NBA G League Ignite and all of the top prospects. There's really, and especially with, I feel, as much transferring as there is now, it feels like with the men's side of the game, the product is not quite what it once was. Whereas we're seeing the women's game ascend to heights that we've never seen before, because, you know, we're paying all this attention to Iowa. And wouldn't you look at that, Dawn Staley and South Carolina are undefeated again and running through everybody again. You've obviously got LSU that gets a lot of headlines. They're going to be a very interesting team to watch going into the tournament. There's so many great teams. And like, let's also not forget UCLA of women's college basketball, UConn. Paige Beckers is healthy again for the first time in forever. People are kind of sleeping on them because we have all these new giants forming in the game. Don't sleep on UConn. Like, there's so much intrigue in the women's game right now.
And then the true giant, the Temple women's basketball team, which is currently still tied for first in the American, But it is a 3-way tie, and they need both Tulsa and North Texas to lose and for them to win their last game to get the outright regular season title.
Temple Owls will be the most terrifying 16 seed since the Harvard Crimson when they beat, I want to say that was Stanford. But no, yeah, the women's game is incredible. Caitlin Clark is incredible. And good Lord, I mean, Xavier, you as a Liberty fan, James, you as an Aces fan.
I'm glad we got our two. I'm glad we got our two, buddy.
You better get this next one, and you might have a chance at the one after that. Because after that, Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston are just going to fucking... They might run off 5 straight at some point.
I think I've been as hyperbolic as anyone coming out about this. I think... they're going to be incredible. It's just going to be another incredibly competitive league because there's too few teams for everyone to not eventually, as this keeps getting better and better, become a juggernaut. I love your orange hoodie right now, Diaz. Are you going to become a Fever fan now? Or are you just going to pick the Fever? I say go for it. I think this year you go all in on the Fever. Just commit.
The tough thing for me is I grew up mocking the people who were like, I'm not a Cavs fan, I'm not a Heat fan, I'm a LeBron fan. Like, I hated those people so much. And yet here I am being exactly that person for Caitlin Clark. And it's
just
like,
beat Rob Lowe. All your stuff is just the league.
Everything league branded, and bet the over in every game. That's the only way to do it.
But I mean, yeah, man. Other than like just the constant background buzz of spring training, how can anything other than Caitlin Clark be making memories for me? However, you all are more diverse than my brain, so I wonder if there's anything perhaps that's got you all going.
Well, if you don't mind if I go, Xavier.
Okay, I just hope it's not the thing that I was going to talk about.
It might be. I'll build some drama with the segue because I think we could all say Caitlin Clark got that dog in her, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Caitlin Clark got that dog in her, and there's a race where having that dog in you is perhaps more essential than any other, and it is one that you covered at length once, James, and it is the Iditarod.
Big fan, yeah.
We got to talk about what's going on in the Iditarod.
We do.
It kicked off this most recent Saturday as we record. It'll be 2 Saturdays ago as you listen to it. If a record is set, it will have already been won by the time you're listening to this. Just for a very quick overview, again, if you missed it, it's a dog sled race in Alaska. It's nearly 1,000 miles, one of the most unique endurance events in the world, and perhaps the GOAT of it. It might be Dallas Seavey. He's won the Iditarod 5 times, which does tie the record for most of all time. And he holds the record for fastest time to complete the Iditarod with 7 days, 14 hours, 8 minutes, 57 seconds in the 2021 edition. In 2024, he can stand alone with his 6th title, but it's going to be pretty tough for him to be able to achieve that now because on his first day, he suffered a pretty major setback. He had made it to the first of 26 checkpoints, and he was en route to the second, when a wild moose attacked his sled and his dogs. The moose injured one of his dogs, but he was able to kill the moose with a handgun that he had on him for protection. Now, this delay in and of itself, dog got hurt, moose attack, that could be enough to set you off your course pretty badly. It might really cost you some time.
Having to take the life of a beautiful northern creature.
It's terrible. Nobody wants to do it.
But you're not just taking its life. Diaz, right. What else do you have to take from this fucking moose?
Well, you might want to get out of there as quick as you can, but race rules dictate that if in the course of the race you have to kill wildlife, you must stay and gut it and help to contribute to salvage as much of the meat as possible. Not only that, if you are racing and you stumble across a dead moose, dead member of wildlife, you are also supposed to, by race rules, stop and help to gut this now dead animal so that the meat can be preserved. So there were a couple other racers that went by. Paige Drobny went over it, and she said she very literally went over it. Like the moose was just that much in the middle of the race course that her sled went over it. There's also Jesse Holmes, who is currently in first place as we record this. He said that he had to punch a moose in the face while passing through that same area We cannot confirm if it was the same moose. We just know that he punched a moose in that same general area. There might have been a third moose. We don't know. There's a lot going on. CV and the pack of dogs, because again, last we left it, the one dog got injured. The whole pack made it to the next checkpoint. The injured dog was airlifted to Anchorage, being seen by a veterinarian now. We don't know a ton about the condition. We do know that he made it to the next checkpoint with all of the dogs, and then the dog was able to get medical care. So fingers crossed for the best outcome there for the dog. Probably not Dallas CV's year to get number 6 now at this point, but it is his year to kill a fucking moose in the course of the race and then need to stay with that moose by race laws to help preserve as much of its meat as possible. What an incredibly unique and Alaskan event. And shout out Dallas Stevie for protecting the pack.
I will say, Falu the dog is in critical condition as of 7 hours ago from Dallas CV's Twitter account. But as Diaz pointed out, there is a specific law in the Iditarod, Rule 34, for killing of game animals that applies to the specific words are an edible big game animal, i.e. moose, caribou, or buffalo. No one can pass. You have to just stop and help gut this animal and then let the guy who killed it go first. Because the Iditarod people are like, yeah, it takes so long to gut a moose or a caribou or, a buffalo that everybody got chip in and you can't get penalized for doing this. But absolutely fucking insane.
I don't remember if Lance Mackey had to kill anything in the Iditarod.
It's one thing that it happened. It's another that it was so predictable that they already had a rule for it. I think the article I read said that there had been 2 other documented incidences of wildlife game being killed and that rule coming into effect. An extremely rare occurrence. And, certainly, RIP that moose too. Let's be real. He was just doing moose shit. This pack of dogs and this crazy guy on a sled come out of nowhere. He was trying to defend his turf. I understand the moose. RIP moose.
RIP moose. It's been brought to you by True Detective Night Country. Xavier, twice now we've stolen the carpet out from underneath you. Is there anything else?
That's all right. I'll just talk about Arsenal again because they did win again 6-0 yesterday, which means they have officially set the record for most goals in a 7-game span with 31.
Hell yeah, dude. Good for you.
Over this time, over these 7 games, Arsenal, again, having also scored 31 goals, have conceded an average of 0.31 XG. In the same period, the 2 title rivals, Man City, were 0.91 per game, and Liverpool was 1.35 per game. So those are the 2 teams that are ahead of Arsenal in the table. And Arsenal is at 0.31. Arsenal now have the best attacking record, most goals scored, best defensive record, least goals conceded at 68 and 23, respectively. Squawka had this great tweet that was, this is the list of goals scored in Arsenal's 7 Premier League games so far in 2024. Arsenal, Nottingham Forest, Arsenal, Liverpool, Arsenal, Newcastle, and then Arsenal 6 more times.
Buffalo.
I thought we were going for the making the band sketch. Dylon.
But it's hard to say. Like, the passing map for the Arsenal-Sheffield game was every single Arsenal outfield player inside the Sheffield half. The field tilt was just Arsenal. There was no instances of Sheffield having any field tilt. The game was over after 15 minutes to the point where fans were already leaving. And the Sheffield manager had a 16th minute substitution after realizing that what he had done was not working. And that guy
that's
was
the mop-up reliever coming in. Got it.
He's the lucky one in that he doesn't have to play the rest of this game. That was such a humiliation. It's hard to argue that Arsenal aren't the best team in the Premier League right now, which is wild because Manchester City have been the best team in the world for almost 10 years, and Liverpool keep finding ways to win the last minute in Jurgen Klopp's swan song. And there's a good chance that Arsenal could be the best team in the league and still lose because they could win every single game for the entirety of 2024 and not win the title if Liverpool don't lose at least once. It's hard not to enjoy it while it's happening right now, but if they don't get a trophy out of it, it's going to feel so disappointing because these numbers feel insane. It feels like there's no way it should be sustainable, and yet 7 games in a row where they've been doing it, including a game against Liverpool, who are number 1 in the league. So, fingers crossed they can keep this going. Massive, massive games over the next couple of weeks where Man City and Liverpool play this upcoming weekend. Arsenal play Man City at the end of the month. Those 2 games have the impact they'll have on the title will be astronomical. So we'll see what happens, but hard not to be happy as an Arsenal fan. Hope they get something out of it. Like, even if it's not the league, if they get someone to win the Champions League, which, less games to win, but still something Arsenal has never done as a team, some sort of trophy to commemorate how good they've been would be phenomenal. And I hope that they can get something because this team deserves some sort of recognition.
Well, speaking of recognition, Xavier, we may have scooped you on memories being made here and now, but when it comes to remembering, you get to make sure you get your pick because it is your pick of category this week, and I am so very excited to see what it is that we have.
It's funny you say that because, this may be my category, but I can't really take credit for it. It was your idea, James.
Yeah, but they don't need to know that. That's a producer's note.
Look, it was James's idea, and it was a thing that was true about my guy last week. So I think we can all take a little piece in this.
Yeah.
And more inside baseball, the 2 of you did choose sports first, so I was kind of scooped on that as well. But I'm glad that you did do that because I came up with someone who I'm extremely excited to talk about. And to start, James, we're going back down under.
Crikey.
And
We should be using the soundboard more often. I'm all in favor of this.
Just to be clear, because I don't think we actually stated it. Our topic this week, Xavier.
Oh, yes. Apologies, listeners. Our topic this week is one-time All-Stars. I'm going back to Australia because it served me so well last week. So today, I want to talk about Timana James Aurora Tahu. I'm just going to stick with Timana Tahu. Timana was born October 16th, 1980 in Melbourne. His father was a Maori from New Zealand, and his mother was an Australian Aboriginal of the Barkinji people. Apologies to any Australian listeners if I am saying that incorrectly. I looked up and there were 3 different pronunciations, so I went with the one that was the most widely cited. Timana grew up in an inner suburb of Melbourne before moving at the age of 12 to Burke, which is a town in western New South Wales, which is their Barkinji area after his parents separated. The town is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. It's more than 8+ hours by car from any city. Very, very much out in the middle of the country. His family ends up moving around a lot over the next few years. At one point, he lived in 5 different places in 3 years. And while growing up, he actually played a lot of basketball. And his dream was to be in the NBA. But the Maori community of Melbourne started a rugby league team. And so he played a lot of league thanks to his dad. At the age of 14, he told his mom that he wanted to live at an Aboriginal boys' hostel in Newcastle. Because he had a bunch of friends there, and he wanted something more stable. So this 14-year-old moves to a specific Aboriginal boys' hostel in the city of Newcastle on the coast of New South Wales.
How way the Maori lad?
I'm in. It's a different Newcastle, but I'm in.
In an interview with the Sydney Morning Herald, he admitted that boredom was pushing him into mischief, and that's why he wanted to make this move. And he was still playing more basketball than league at this point. But there was a free trial for the Newcastle Knights league team. And since it came with a day off of school, he borrowed cleats from a friend and went to the tryout. It went so well that he ends up joining the Newcastle youth system while still living in this hostel.
Kids, you should skip school. You'll get to join the professional sports environment.
Who's to say it wouldn't work for you? In high school, he started dating a woman named Kelsey Faulkner. and end up moving in with her family. So he's finally out of the hostel. And then he becomes a dad just a couple days after he turns 18, when his daughter Lakeda is born. He said, I was a pretty irresponsible person. I was just a young kid. I was playing under 19s for Newcastle then. And that's when I sort of had to grow up a lot faster. I really didn't know what I was going into, but once I had her, I had to make a better future for her. Still only 18, Tahu makes his NRL senior debut for Newcastle in round 12 of the 1999 season. For those who don't know, the NRL, or the National Rugby League, is the professional competition for rugby league in Australia and New Zealand. And it's important to make that distinction because rugby league is different from rugby union. If you know rugby more from UK and Europe, you're probably more familiar with union, while league is more popular in the Oceania region. League is a faster paced and slightly less physical game, still very physical, but slightly less than union. League has 13 players instead of 15. Scoring is different with tries, which is touching the ball down in the goal area, with 5 in union and 4 in league. There's also different scoring for penalties and goals. The most significant change with league is that it's kind of more like American football, where a team has 6 plays to score. If a player gets tackled in union, they have to get rid of the ball and anyone can pick it up. In league, if a player gets tackled, they just get to pass it back to another one of their teammates who then just goes forward. If a team gets tackled 6 times in one possession, they turn it over. So after 5 tackles, you'll see a team's punt a lot. So it's very different in pacing and much more similar to American football, to the point where they actually just opened the most recent season this past weekend with 2 games at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, trying to kind of grow the audience to America because they believe that Americans would be interested in league. Also less scrums in league. We have the picture of rugby. You think of the scrums with just 6 guys on each team just going head to head into each other to get the ball. Doesn't really happen as much in league. But back to Tahu. He makes 3 appearances in that 99 season. He scores 1 try. But again, he's only 18. The next season, he becomes a major component of the Newcastle attack. Playing mostly as a winger. Those are the players who are usually the fastest on the teams, whose goal it is to finish attacking moves with tries. They don't really kick field goals at all. He finishes 2nd overall in the regular season in try scoring with 18, which is phenomenal for, again, a teenager. He scores again during the playoffs, and Newcastle makes it all the way to the semifinals before falling 26-20 to Sydney. Continues to excel. During the 2001 season, he again finishes top 5 in tries, 16 in the regular season, as Newcastle enters the playoffs as the 3 seed for the 2nd year in a row. They get their revenge on Sydney. They crush them 40-6 in the first round. And then they hold off Cronulla 18-10 to make the grand final against heavily favored Parramatta, who had broken the record for most points in the regular season. Newcastle starts off hot. They score 4 first-half tries and take a record 24-0 lead into the halftime. Parramatta scores a quick try coming out of the half, and then Tahu responds with a try of his own to push the lead back up, which was very key, as over the last 25 minutes, Parramatta outscores Newcastle 20-2. But this isn't enough, as Newcastle hangs on for a famous 30-24 win.
I was worried that I was going to find out that 24-0 is the same as 28-3 to these fans.
Almost, but thanks to Tahu's second half try, they do hold on. And this is still Newcastle's most recent grand final win. So, this is the high point in Newcastle Rugby League. Despite a lack of playoff success in the subsequent years, Tahu continues to be one of the best wingers in the league. He finishes 2nd in tries again in 2002. And during this time, he also becomes a regular representative for Origin. The states in Australia have their own kind of competition against each other. It's called the State of Origin or just Origin. It's like the famous blue jerseys for New South Wales. And he becomes a regular representative for the New South Wales team. He also makes 5 full appearances for the Australia National Rugby League team, which is by far the best rugby league national team in the world. They've won 16 world championships. Makes sense if, Australia is the place that it's played the most, that they would be the best at it. So when you're going competitive wise, The Origin series is the most competitive one because it's, just a bunch of Australians who are the best in their states beating the crap out of each other. But, he's a regular representative for them and for Australia overall. After 6 years, 97 appearances, and 82 tries, Tahu does leave Newcastle after the 2004 season to go to Parramatta. In 3 years there, he wins the regular season championship once, but there wasn't anything else really of note. He was good, but the team didn't have that much success. After the 2007 season, Tahu shocks Australia because he announced that he was switching from league to union and signing with the New South Wales Wauters of Super Rugby. This is, a massive switch. People do not really go between the two. It used to be more common back when there were less differences. So, the history goes back 150 years in Australia of these two different types of rugby, or they call them codes of rugby. Sorry, that's what it's called in Australia.
No. I'm sure
it's the rugby codes.
Respect the code.
And the original reason why they switched and broke up was because people wanted to pay players, and union was strictly amateur. So that's where the schism came, just from paying people. So they were really similar for the longest time. But ever since they really kind of differentiated, it became much more difficult to switch between the two because they're different games. So this was a major shock. In rugby union, the now 27-year-old Tahu moves inside to the center position, which is more of a facilitator role. It's a pretty normal switch for wingers who maybe have lost a little bit of speed and can't do that anymore. So the centers try to play make for the wingers.
So if I may, if this is so rare, what is the skill set of his that either will or he believes will allow him to translate over? Is it because of his passing and he can just move to this one role, and in that capacity the game is not as different as it is for other positions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. He'd have less scrums and things to deal with, and with the two extra players on the team, it would be much harder to be a winger. But as a facilitator, he thought that he could make that switch. And, he takes to it surprisingly well. His Waratahs team makes it to the grand final in his first season. They do end up losing to the New Zealand Crusaders 20-12, but it's still really impressive, to the point where Tahu gets called up for the Tri-Nations Rugby Union tournament between Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, making his debut as a sub against New Zealand. This made him a dual international, as one of the few athletes who's played for both the senior Australian League and Union national teams. There have only been 4 since the turn of the century. Like I said, there was more that happened back in the day, so he was 44th overall, but only 4 in the past 25 years. So again, not a thing that happens that often.
There's just one thing that I need to say while you're going through all these incredible accomplishments of this undoubtedly exceptional athlete, Xavier. And I'm just making sure, and maybe forget into it later, but our category this week was one-time All-Stars, right? I'm just making sure.
Don't worry. Don't worry. I'm getting to it. In 2010, after a couple of years with Union, Tahu does switch back to League, and he signs back with Parramatta. He has a bit of a rough year, making the adjustment back, but he also has a major incident at a camp for the New South Wales team, when an assistant coach makes a racist comment about one of the Indigenous players on the team. And that led to Tahu walking out on the team. Quote, "It's something I feel strongly about. To sacrifice my New South Wales origin jumper and to give up the chance of bringing the trophy back to New South Wales is obviously something I gave a lot of thought to. But I felt I had to make a statement that this sort of behavior in any environment is unacceptable. As a senior player, I had to show that. The fact that it came from someone on the coaching staff that is highly respected in the game and has such influence in rugby league, and someone I have known for a long time, made it more hurtful." This coach does have to resign, but unfortunately, as is often the case with these things, Tahu gets more flack from the public and the rugby community for, disrespecting the game than the coach got for being racist. Quote, "It cost me a lot. It cost me finances, cost me representative jumpers. I became a person that was known to carry too much baggage when I go into a club. I felt like I got backslammed. I've been given death threats. People wonder why we're talking about death threats to my kids. I had to pull my kids out of school. We had to go into hiding. So we went through a lot. Me, my wife, and my kids, and the family that were around me. It took until 2022 for Tahu to get a formal apology from the National Rugby League. And one thing that really sucks, while looking up highlights of Tahu for doing this prep, I found a lot of racist comments on them still. Like, the amount of hate cannot be understated for a guy who led a walkout in support of not being racially abused. So, bad times. After this issue, like you said, clubs thought he had too much baggage for, again, calling out racism. So he gets cut by Parramatta. So fuck Parramatta. And it seemed like no one really wanted him. But really late in the offseason, he does get signed by the Penrith Panthers. It was like a kind of last-minute addition. Unfortunately, a torn pec does end his season early. Now in his 30s, it looked like this was probably the end for him. But like any good guy, he still had more shit to prove. And he signs a 2-year deal back with Newcastle after 8 years away.
I was wondering if this was going to leave with him having ultimately like spurned them once upon a time, and that being the end of the Newcastle relationship.
Look, it's an Australia guy. We knew that there was going to be a boomer.
It is true. And in the 2012 season, Tahu appears in 22 games for Newcastle, and he scores 7 tries. And after this season, he gets named to his first and only All-Star game.
Okay,
Because-
but like this was the first year they had it, or like what?
No, so they did start it more recently than that, but what I should note is that the Rugby League All-Stars match is interesting. It started after the 2009 season as a All-Star Showcase and National Reconciliation game. And the NRL All-Star match was a game between 2 All-Star teams, both voted on by the public. One, a general NRL All-Star team, and one, the Indigenous All-Stars.
This feels a lot like the kind of liberalism that people who would have voted for Barack Obama a third time would do.
I mean, here's one thing I'll say. NBA All-Star Game, Americans against the world, who wouldn't be excited to see that? That would be interesting. But when it is within your own country dividing it, that does feel a little worse.
So this All-Stars match, the Rugby League All-Stars match, it is the NRL All-Stars versus the Indigenous All-Stars. They do later switch to Indigenous All-Stars versus World All-Stars. So you were on the right path, Diaz.
So is that just folding white Australians into Indigenous? Like, you've been here long enough now.
That's folding them into the world part. The white guys are on the world team, and the Indigenous team is.
So it's changing absolutely nothing except for the name.
Exactly.
It's team hashtag from here and team hashtag colonizer.
Hey, you know what? The Indigenous All-Stars have enough great talent that they do kick the NRL All-Stars ass in this game.
Okay. Well, if this is a land back moment, then I do enjoy that.
The 32-year-old Tahu starts this match as a lock, which is an inside forward playmaker. It's a bit of a different role than center. And they crush the NRL All-Stars 32-6 in front of 41,000 at Lang Park in Brisbane. So this is not just we're trying to be progressive and make you forget about the terrible things we did to Indigenous Australians. They can easily make 2 teams of extremely good players on both. It
sounds like they can make teams of extremely good players on both, actually, Xavier, because that I believe you said was 42-6.
32-6, but to be fair,
32-6.
The NRL All-Stars did win the year before that. So at this, by this time, it was like it was pretty even. In fact, through 7 years, it was 4-3 Indigenous All-Stars to NRL All-Stars / World All-Stars. So it's actually like fairly even. After this, Tahu plays 2 more years for Newcastle, mostly providing a veteran presence on the bench for a bad team. In the last match of the 2014 season against St. George, Tahu comes off the bench to score 2 tries, which was his only scoring of the season. Also fitting in is this was his last ever NRL match. Overall, including both regular season and playoffs, Tahu plays 196 matches, scoring 121 tries, with 126 and 93 coming from Newcastle, including their most recent championship and his only ever All-Star appearance for his Newcastle days. He does spend 1 year in the United States after this because the U.S. tried making a rugby league team. So he played for Denver for a year, which was interesting. The Denver Stampede it was. But the more interesting thing about that time was he took coaching clinics and was, speaking with universities in the U.S. about safer sport stuff while he was there. And after doing that, he came back to Newcastle and began formal research with the University of Newcastle about how to avoid concussions and other serious injuries. There's this really cool YouTube video where it shows him getting all these diodes put on him and him and other professional rugby players tackling each other with these diodes so they can make 3D models to, model collision speed and find ways to make it safer to avoid serious injury, which was really cool. So the U.S. did at least help do that for him. But after retiring, he spent 4 years presenting on Over the Black Dot, which is an Indigenous-oriented rugby league program that airs on NITV, which is the free-to-air Indigenous TV channel of Australia. As you may expect, the show primarily features discussions and highlights of National Rugby League matches with a focus on Indigenous players, which, again, there are a significant number of. This is not like a very small thing. It is like a very big portion of the league is Indigenous. Nowadays, he works with the NRL in helping Indigenous athletes. So originally he was doing business development for the NRL School to Work program, which helps Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander high school students make the transition from school to work or tertiary education. Famous Torres Strait Islander Patty Mills. His cousin, Edric Lee, is also a National Rugby League player for the Dolphins.
Patty Mills, come back to San Antonio. Please, free agent Patty Mills, come back to San Antonio.
He just signed with the Heat.
Victor. God damn it, son of a bitch! I haven't seen
it happened like today.
Fuck.
Yeah. So he said health, life expectancy, the justice system, and education, there's a big gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And that through this position, he wanted to achieve his goal of giving every First Nations child equal opportunities to study and work. After that, he became the NRL senior manager of the Indigenous Elite Pathways. Among his many duties, he actually was highly involved in the organization of the All-Stars match, which now they have updated it again. It is Indigenous All-Stars versus Maori All-Stars, and is part of the Indigenous Round, which is a week-long celebration of Indigenous cultures for rugby league.
So there are no white All-Stars anymore.
Nope, they got rid of the white All-Stars.
Who needs them?
Nobody
Hell
needs
yeah,
them.
honestly.
In a 2022 interview, he said, I think for me, representing Indigenous people, it's not that there's a lot of pressure, but regarding what has happened in the past and the things still happening today, as well as how we are moving forward as a nation, it does weigh a little bit on the players. It gets emotional and they don't want to disappoint. That's probably the thing I felt too, that I never want to disappoint my family or my friends in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, those who we represent during this round. And I just think it's awesome that he's still working to improve Indigenous relations. One thing that I saw a lot of while doing research for this is similar to Native American stuff here. There is a lot of drug and alcohol and crime issues in the Indigenous communities for systemic racism reasons. Australia has their own issues, and his commitment to working on that through his ability through rugby league is really commendable. One other thing I want to note for Diaz, outside the Newcastle stuff, thanks to his love of basketball, his signature celebration was a slam dunk over the goalposts. In a 2020 interview, he was asked about it. He noted that the game is so high profile now that he thinks players get too stressed and kind of robotic and don't want to celebrate. He said that sports in general need to realize it's an entertainment business. If we can get blokes to layer up, which apparently means show off in like Australian slang, which I love, and breaking out the dance moves or slam dunking and doing unique things to celebrate after tries, it can only be good.
In the words of former Flyers goaltender Ilya Brizgalov, it's only game. Why you have to be mad?
But that is my guy, Timana Tahu. Phenomenal Newcastle legend and one-time Indigenous All-Star.
Well, if we may, I'd like to keep this international. When we decided on this category, I immediately thought of the WNBA because my angle was going to be, this idea that very early on in the league, what you have is a lot of people coming into it already well established in their professional careers in their 30s who are like going to have shorter careers. They're only going to be able to be all-stars so many times because there's only going to be so many available to them. You know about Cynthia Cooper, who comes in and immediately wins 2 MVPs if you know your WNBA history, but you might not know about someone like Kim Hampton, who had had a 12-year-long career in Europe up to this point, and in the very first All-Star game makes it, and then that's the end of her career after that year. However, as I found someone through some searches in Sports Reference to find that fit something about this category. The all-star appearance for a one-time all-star so often is the crowning achievement. It is, one of the higher honors or awards or titles or pieces of hardware they're going to have. I want to bring to you someone that I think might be able to take the title of most decorated one-time all-star ever. And what we are going to need to do to start is, for the second time, we are going to have to go to Belgium with the story of my guy, on Wauters.
Do we have a chocolate drop we can add to this, or a cuckoo clock or something?
The land of chocolate.
Anne Wauters, spelled with a W, and because it's pronounced that way, as you might guess, she is also from near that kind of Flemish region. That's where she's born on October 12th, 1980, St. Gilles-Vasse. Growing up, she's an awkward kid, gets a really early growth spurt, and by the age of 12, she's already towering over everyone else. And she talks about embodying the Belgian stereotype of being shy and understated. Again, it's just this country in the middle of a bunch of other countries, and they speak the languages of everyone around them and do not have their own language. And that has an impact on the national identity. But finally, here at the age of 12, she finds basketball, and there's not a big Belgian basketball scene. But France, at this point, is starting to have a kind of 90s renaissance. Nearby, Netherlands has Rick Smits. There are growing basketball legacies in the countries around. And wearing number 12 as her birth date, she starts getting into the French league. She joins the very distinguished club US Valenciennes Olympique, and it's also referred to as USVO, which I will do in the future because I don't want to say all of that. But she starts there in 99 as she's also seeing all of these tapes coming over from the NBA, the Jordan Bulls at the time, coming from these first couple seasons of the W with Houston. My feelings on dynasties are stated here. I do think they're dumb, but in this case, admittedly, they are helping to captivate this player. After that first season in 99 with USVO, on April 25th, 2000, she's driven to a TV studio in Brussels. Not really given a whole lot of heads up, just hey, there's something big we got to have you do. She finds out during a live broadcast that she has been selected first overall in the 2000 WNBA draft by the Cleveland Rockers. This was nowhere near her radar, had not been heavily scouted by American clubs, and she certainly didn't know that this was going on. So 19-year-old Wauters is going to head over to Cleveland, plays all 32 games her rookie year, almost exclusively coming off the bench as the backup center, about 18 minutes a game, 6.2 points, 1.5 stocks. During this time, she is not only the first Belgian athlete in the league, she is the youngest player in the league. And she really only picked up the game 7 years ago at this point. So she's still seen as kind of a developmental draft pick. But now, like I said, she is going to become the most decorated one-time all-star. It's not going to start here at the W initially, though. We're going to have to, in the offseason, go back to USVO. There is no developing needed for her here. She is just head and shoulders better than most of the other players here. And this year, USVO wins the French League title and the Domestic Cup, which qualifies them for EuroLeague. She returns to Cleveland that year, now a champion in not her home country, but the league that she has come up in. She starts in 14 of her 24 games for the Rockers that year, up to 9.8 points, almost 26 minutes a game. Last year, they had lost in the Eastern Conference Finals to the Liberty, but they'd gotten a little bit of experience. This year, despite being first overall in the Eastern Conference during the regular season, they don't even make it back to the conference finals. They lose to the Charlotte Sting, and this loss, it does sting, but she can't dwell on that because she has to get back to USVO, where once again, she's going to win both the league title and the Domestic Cup. And now they will add a 2002 EuroLeague title to it. 5 big old pieces of hardware there in the cabinet for Ann Wauters. We got to build on this stateside. Starts 25 games for the Cleveland Rockers. Breaks the double-digit barrier in points, 11.2. And the 22-10 Rockers from last season go 10-22 and miss the playoffs entirely. And after she goes back to France a third time to once again win the Domestic League and the Domestic Cup, decides does not need to go back to the W. Actually, you know what? Maybe not doing it for her right there in the States at this time. She'll just, for a 4th straight season, win the French League title and the Domestic Cup and a 2nd EuroLeague title. They also add to that the World League title, which is a short-lived FIBA competition. All that Ann Wauters has done outside of the US at this point has been an immense success, but Cleveland could not get it done with her. However, without her, they have a slight improvement during the season to 17-17. But while that gets them into the playoffs, this loss this time is worse than the previous seasons because this loss is the one that convinces owner Gordon Gund that he just doesn't really want to own this team anymore. Doesn't feel like having it. No more WNBA team in Cleveland. And so the team folds.
I think this would have been the same offseason that Gordon Gund thought he was re-signing Carlos Boozer and then didn't because Carlos Boozer left to Utah and he wrote that very melodramatic letter criticizing Carlos Boozer for leaving. Because this would have been, the Rockers last season was 03.
Yes. 2003 is the last season for the Cleveland Rockers.
Boozer left after the 03-04 season. So, honestly, and this is now the RTG canonical universe, Gordon Gund got rid of the Rockers for the money for Carlos Boozer's contract. Therefore, Carlos Boozer's betrayal of Cleveland and Gordon Gund was 100% ethical.
Okay, I can live with this. And also, him having already canceled his own WNBA team earlier in the season explains why he then was happy to release that incredibly incensed letter about Mr. Boozer.
You also forgot to mention, we've already talked about this specific Cleveland Rockers team when we talked about Penny Taylor during the Boomerang Guys episode.
Well, I'm going to mention Penny Taylor in just 1 second because Penny Taylor is about to get sent somewhere else, as is Ann Wauters, because there's going to be a dispersal draft. Penny Taylor goes first overall. She is the unquestioned star of this team. Ann Wauters goes 4th. She is one of the more attractive assets as this breaks down. She goes to the team that denied her a finals berth her rookie year. She is going to become a New York Liberty legend. The Liberty at this time are led by Elena Baranova and New York legend, Las Vegas legend, San Antonio legend, Becky Hammon. They start 6-1 with Ann Wauters in tow. She does decide to come join them after this second time being drafted into the WNBA, this time hopefully with a better team. Unfortunately, they drop the next 6 straight, which leads to their head coach being fired after they are 7-9 for the start of July.
Sounds like the Liberty.
Yeah, the rest of the season does not go great, and I don't know if it is injury or if she just kind of fell out of the rotation with the change in the coaching staff. I couldn't find exactly the reason for this, but in her game log, she only plays 1 game, Ann Wauters, that is, after the coaching change. And so now, internationally, she's going to leave after this kind of unfinished season, and maybe France got a little bit boring. Maybe more money was being offered elsewhere. She's going to spread her wings, go to Russia, join CSKA Samara. They do not win a league title or a cup that year, but in 2000, thanks to their previous season, they go to the EuroLeague finals. And Ann Wauters wins with a 2nd club, yet another EuroLeague title. At this point, she has participated in the last 5 EuroLeague finals, winning 3 of them between her 2 different clubs.
Look, we can draw the parallels. Number 12 wins anywhere she goes. She's the Tom Brady of women's basketball.
Sure, and also maybe because at the center position, while she crashes the boards a lot, and while her stocks continue to rise in many different ways, she is not necessarily the focal point of any of these teams. I do not have any record during these times of any all-star appearances in any of these domestic leagues in other countries. I've tried to look into whether that was. Some of them do not have games. And also, I just don't have records of her being selected to any that were. So she's on all of these championship teams, but this is maybe like, the early game manager Brady still. Real quick, I feel like I should also mention, we said that Wauters plays into Belgian stereotypes a little bit. She also plays into one particular cliche with the WNBA. While in France, she had dated some guys and just never did it ever really seem to click. And by this point now, as she goes to Russia, she is dating a woman and it seems to click a lot better. And she says, oh, okay, cool. That's myself.
Oh, so like Penny Taylor?
Yeah, like Penny Taylor, like Telly Belvalacqua, like a lot of players that we have talked about.
Oh my God, so shocking.
Russia also famously not a great place to be gay. So she's like out at this time, but she's keeping her personal life close to her chest. Just felt like we should mention that's going on. Speaking of WNBA cliches, we're back to the WNBA for the 2005 season. She's going to finally taste some amount of success here in the States. Through the midway point, she started all 14 of New York's games, playing 31.9 minutes a game, 14.2 points, 7 boards, and all of this is not enough for her to start in the 2005 WNBA All-Star game. But it is enough for her to be a reserve, along with Becky Hammon as her teammate there, representing the New York Liberty with the East, who get the fucking doors blown off of them, 99-122 against the West. But for 12 glorious minutes, in which she records a block, 3 rebounds, and 4 points on 1 for 4 shooting from the field with 2 for 2 free throws, and Wauters is a WNBA All-Star. Cools off a little bit in the second half, but all 28 games she plays, she starts. Maintains a still pretty good average, 13.7 points per game, 6.6 rebounds. She is third in most improved player voting this year. New York goes 18-16, which is pretty much always going to get you into the postseason. But they lose to the Indiana Fever 2-0 in the first round. And maybe the losing over here, it's just wearing on her. Maybe the All-Star game was kind of this crowning achievement, and maybe the glory of Europe is too tempting. Wauters does not return to the WNBA once again next year. She instead stays with Russia throughout 2007. They have a third-place championship in the EuroLeague there in 2007. Goes to another Russian club, CSKA Moscow. She's reunited there with teammate Becky Hammon, and the two do capture the Russian Domestic Cup that year. And speaking of Becky, back in the WNBA, here in 08, they are expanding. And the Atlanta Dream get a crack at everyone's rosters. And Ann Wauters is still technically on New York's roster. So for the third time in the WNBA, Ann Wauters is drafted and decides, you know what? Yeah, let's give it a little try. Except not for the Atlanta Dream. She's almost immediately, 2 months later, traded from the Atlanta Dream to the San Antonio Silver Stars to reunite with her New York and Russian teammate, Becky Hammon. Also reuniting with her former coach in Cleveland, who is now the coach and executive here, Dan Hughes.
Just like procedurally, that doesn't feel like it should be illegal. You draft somebody in the expansion draft, you keep them. You can't just then trade them right away.
We talked about this with the NWSL one and how insane that was. Paying people not to draft someone, drafting someone, then trading them to someone else, and then that team trading it back to the original team as a way to counteract expansion rules. Expansion drafts are stupid as hell, but they make for great content.
Look, I'm all for expansion drafts. I'm just saying, once you draft,
you gotta play a year. Like, that's a member of the team for a year now.
1 year conscripted service, and then you can go do what you want. But like, it really makes the players just feel like assets when it's like, oh, well, we could take Ann Wauters because her contract matches with this person, and then we'll just do that. Like, no, come on now.
Sierra Enge was drafted in the expansion draft and then was traded from Bay FC to Houston, and then Houston traded her back to San Diego. So she was expansion draft selected, traded twice, and back to her original team within a day.
Speaking of cities that are in Texas and also cities that start with San, here we are with the San Antonio Silver Stars, who at the end of all of this...
Wait, yes. I have one more. That just sounds like extortion with extra steps, Xavier. No,
it was 100% extortion. Like, the Houston team did absolutely nothing, and they got multiple picks and allocation money, for no reason. They did
Middleman
nothing.
gets paid. Middleman gets paid.
Incredible. But on
Wauters. Yeah.
On Wauters and Wauters.
Well, she finds herself in the middle of a pretty good San Antonio Silver Stars team. They're considered like pretty high-level contenders early on in the year. She plays in 32 games. She has a career high in rebound. Gets some down-ballot MVP votes. She finishes 24th. And for the record, 25 players received MVP votes.
So not the last.
It's just like the AP poll. You might be 24, but you know what? That means you get a number before your name.
Exactly.
The 24th best player in the WNBA and Wauters.
Well, and 24 is the number of wins that the number 1 seed Silver Stars get that year. They get all the way to Ann Wauters' first WNBA finals. She is so close to finally a trophy over here in this country, and they get swept in 3 fucking games by the Detroit Shock. As happened to Wauters here before in the W, that first successful year is followed by a steep drop-off. 15-19 the next year when they lose the first round. I'm out of here again. I'm gone. She goes to a third Russian club, Ekaterinburg, where she finally wins her first Russian league title and a second domestic cup, and another third-place championship in the EuroLeague. Takes a full break from everything because both Ann Wauters and her wife are pregnant this year. They give birth about a month.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I don't know why you would welcome that on yourself, but look, dude.
Awful.
Different strokes for different folks. They give birth a month apart. Yeah. This does not keep her down for long, though. Gets another stamp on the passport. Goes to Spain. Plays for this team, Ros Caceres Valencia. And the club wins the Spanish league before, for the 4th time, Ann Wauters wins a EuroLeague championship, now with her 3rd different club. And, just put in perspective, again, 4 French league titles, 4 French clubs, 2 Russian titles, 3 Russian clubs, 1 Spanish title, a club in Turkey she has won a competition with. There was one that she got in Korea around like 2006 that is mentioned several times in interviews with her, but there's very, very little information about the Korean Women's Basketball League. I know who won the year before, and then there's no information about the 2060s when she supposedly won 4 EuroLeague titles, except once again, she still has no WNBA hardware. And so she comes back one more time, signs with Seattle. This is just 2 years removed from Burden Jackson's second title win. 16-18 Storm, though, they limp into the playoffs. They're bounced in 3 games by the burgeoning Lynx dynasty, and this again ends Wauters' time in the league. She makes like she's from Harlem and globetrots, goes to Turkey, goes to Russia, goes to Belgium for 1 year. There's a Belgium National League. It's still going on, but it's very, very low level. But she does go 1 year, and of course, in her 1 season there, she does win a Belgian National League title before moving on. Signs this year, just out of nowhere, with the LA Sparks. This is, original franchise, but they have not won anything since the Lisa Leslie ones. This is not like one recently removed from success as some of the others had been. But they do have certain CP3, Candace Parker. They've also got guard Chelsea Gray, Aces legend. We love her. Importantly, Chelsea Gray also number 12. So Ann Wauters, when they bring her in December for a little bit of depth, can't wear the number 12. She's got to wear 21. And maybe that's what did the trick. Because despite the fact that she has her fewest starts in any season since her first rookie one with Cleveland, despite the fact that she basically comes out in mop-up time and is fully a depth piece, the Sparks are able to get their way all the way to the finals. They find themselves in the middle again of this very, very good Sparks-Lynx rivalry. If you are not familiar with it, I highly recommend looking at the true heights of Maya Moore's time over there in Minnesota with Lindsay Whalen. It is a 5-game classic that in the end, she gets her WNBA Finals trophy. And she'll play with the European team for a little bit longer. But there's one more team I want to mention just real quick on the way out about Ann Wauters, and that's the Belgian Cats. That is the national team for Belgium. They are called the Cats, not like the 3 Lionesses or any of the cool ones. They're just the Cats. And historically, they're quite bad. Belgium, as we've gone through, no tradition similar to like the Netherlands or France. But Wauters, her generation, which also includes big-time Belgian star Marjorie Carpro, they had kind of started this groundswell. And by the time that Wauters has had a longer career, there are other stars coming up like Emma Messiman, who is still out today in the WNBA. And with this sundowning generation and a new one rising up, there's a perfect moment where Belgium takes off for just a brief moment. They themselves win a third place championship at Eurobasket in 2017. But Wauters' final move in any kind of like real competitive basketball, she and Belgium have this game against Sweden that qualifies them for the Olympics. She wins this and decides the Olympics are going to be her final bow out. They do advance at the 2020 Olympics. In 2021, which will always get me, they advance out of the group stage. In Tokyo, they unfortunately have to then face the host country, and being the first team that the host country face in knockout play is tough. They fall by just a single point, 86-85. And like you can see, it's pretty brutal on a lot of these Belgian players' faces as they leave. It is the end for Wauters. But this is the end of someone who's been a winner of 22 major trophies on 3 different continents in 7 countries. She considers this run in the Olympics with her national team her true crowning achievement. Not any of those titles, not her All-Star game appearance in the WNBA with the New York Liberty, not even her finals win there later on. That run with Belgium is what she looks back on most fondly. She is now a coach in the W. She actually joined the Chicago Sky the same offseason as Emma Messiman back in 2022. But Wauters, hope that I delivered what I promised. I don't know that it's necessarily the most narratively compelling story in that she's never really faced any hardship. She just is simply the most decorated one-time All-Star of all time.
No, honestly, like I called her the Tom Brady of women's basketball. I think the more appropriate one is probably the Lionel Messi of women's basketball, because it sounds like just about everything that she ever played for, she won.
Yeah, I don't think she went to a single league where she did not come away with some kind of championship.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, that's incredibly impressive. And I think both of your guys are incredibly impressive. But if I'm going to already start the litigation process a little bit, I think there wasn't enough focus on those All-Star games. And that's not going to be the case with my guy. First of all, because with the sport of hockey, they nailed their All-Star weekends, perhaps more than any other sport does these days. The skills competition is fascinating between the fastest shot, the fastest skater, the accuracy challenge, all that stuff. I think the 3-on-3 divisional format strikes a perfect balance between they take it kind of serious, they don't go too hard. I think it's a great format. And that format is still fairly new. It was introduced in 2016. And it was that 2016 All-Star game that is perhaps the most memorable for reasons that the NHL offices actively tried to prevent. I want to talk about the MVP of that 2016 All-Star game, the man whose campaign started as a joke, but it turned into one of the best moments in recent sports history. One-time NHL All-Star, John Scott.
Yep.
What if they successfully got Paul Bissonnette onto the All-Star team?
If Biz Nasty would have ever made it, but John Scott has a great story of his own. He was born September 26, 1982 in Edmonton. And you might think 1980s, Edmonton, grows up an Oilers fan, right? You'd be wrong. He was always a huge Ray Bourque fan in particular. He was a Boston Bruins fan growing up in Edmonton.
It's just all I can ever think of. Sorry. Swedish Chef would not be a fan, though. He would be a fan of Swedish players, and there were never enough of them on those Boston teams.
Never quite enough. Although Raymond Bourque, when he finally linked up with the Swede Peter Forsberg, that's when he finally got his Stanley Cup. Something to think about
and the
there.
Swedish Chef was probably really, really happy about that.
But yeah, John Scott loved Raymond Bourque. He loved him so much that growing up, he made sure that he always had a Sherwood TP70 stick. That was the same stick that Ray Bourque played with. It was an essential for him growing up. He always loved hockey, but hockey didn't love him. He tried out for a number of junior B teams growing up, and every coach told him the same thing. You're too big, you're too slow. John Scott resolved within himself, well, I can't do anything about too big, but I can maybe do something about too slow. So he tries to really work on his skating skills. And by the time he's 18, he finally is able to sign on with the junior hockey team. Not any of the major Canadian ones, but he signs with the Chicago Freeze of the North American Hockey League. Plays one season, 53 games, 4 goals, 8 assists, most notably, right off the bat, 240 penalty minutes.
I would love to see how much higher than the average player the hockey guys discussed on here's penalty minutes is. Like what the PIM plus of RTG hockey nominees is compared to the league average.
It's got to be at least a factor of 5, if not 10, right? Like at least. But this isn't because he's out here getting in fights. He actually doesn't get in a fight at all. He's just a goofy guy out here. You know, he's gangly. It's hard for him to skate. But based on that one season, he does get enough attention within the Division I American hockey system, at least, that Michigan Tech decides to offer him a scholarship. And the Huskies aren't necessarily a powerhouse of Division I hockey, but they have 3 national titles in their program history. They've produced other NHL alums, Jarkko Ruutu, Tony Esposito. If you want to go back, the first U.S.-born player ever drafted into the NHL, Herb Boxer, was a Michigan Tech Husky. So there's a little bit of a prestige to this program that he's joining. To John Scott, he's looking at this as, sure, awesome, I get to play hockey for 4 more years. There's no illusions as to what kind of player he is.
College.
Yeah, there's no, and then like this, like I can prove myself in college and build towards continuing to play professional. He's like, look, the fact I got a scholarship, this is great. Put my head down 4 years, play hockey, get a college degree for free on his scholarship. And he wants to take his best advantage of that as he possibly can. So a lot of his teammates on the hockey team, you know, maybe they're communications majors, they're business majors. He majors in mechanical engineering. It was a very serious course to the extent that he remembers his freshman year entering into their chemistry final. The teacher was playing Another One Bites the Dust because 50% of the students on average failed that exam. Just to emphasize, it's not a joke of a major. You know, when you're an athlete, you can choose something to skate by. John Scott's not here to just skate by. Pardon the pun. That actually wasn't intentional. That was actually accidental. I am actually sorry for that one, Xavier. I didn't mean it.
I do not forgive you, but it's okay.
The 2 kind of good things to being in this engineering school as a hockey player. The first one is there's some long bus rides to some of the different schools that they have to play. So, you know, going from their campus in Michigan, they have some road trips to Minnesota, to North Dakota. These can be like 10+ hour bus rides sometimes. So for him, that's plenty of time to have the books open on the bus, dedicate a lot of time studying. And while he's in the engineering school, he has just enough time for socializing. He meets Danielle, who is herself a biomedical engineering student at Michigan Tech, and begins to form a relationship with Danielle. Over the 4 seasons that he's at Michigan Tech, plays in 126 games, scores 7 goals, 12 assists, to go with 347 penalty minutes. Still no fights, though. Still has not fought in a game.
Which, like 347 without fights is pretty impressive.
Very impressive. And I mean, like, there's got to be, because it's an odd number, there's a major penalty in there somewhere. Like, there's definitely some shenanigans. But no actual fights. Hasn't dropped the gloves, hasn't thrown punches. After that senior year, it's time to move into the real world. So he proposed to Danielle. She said yes. And he was just a couple credits shy of a degree. So his plan was over the summer, finish up the degree, go into the fall, find a job working at GM is probably where he figured, I'm already in Michigan. Why not just stay local? Start building a pretty nice life. Nothing crazy, nothing fantastic, but a solid, very solid beginning to your life as you enter adulthood. He gets a phone call, though, from the Minnesota Wild, and they don't want to sign him to the main team, but they are interested in him to play with their AHL team. He goes to Danielle, and he says, look, you know, I didn't expect this. This is a crazy opportunity. They go back and forth, and finally, the compromise that they settle on is give me 3 years to pursue this. If after 3 years, I still haven't made the NHL, it's not going anywhere, I'm done. We'll move on. And so with that agreement in place, he signs his deal with the Wild, and he accepts his assignment to play for the Houston Aeros. AEROS, like aeronautical, not arrow like shooting a bow, just to be clear. I could go over his stats, but the most important thing to remember is that to this point, John Scott is a virgin goon. He has not yet dropped his gloves and actually gotten into a fight with anybody. But while it's never explicitly stated to John Scott at any point in his career why he is being signed, people speak in certain kind of pleasantries and codes like, well, John, you're a big guy. We brought you here for a reason. We're looking forward to having you on the team and hopefully protecting some of the smaller players on the team. Never said in explicit terms, but we all kind of know what the deal is. Nonetheless, he's still a little timid in those first few games. People are coming up to him trying to make a name for themselves, and he's just not quite there yet. He doesn't want to fight yet. In maybe their 8th or 9th game of the year, they're going against Peoria, and they have a noted enforcer on their team, DJ King. And it might have been a reverse psychology ploy, but the coach went up to John Scott before and he said, listen, DJ King is a killer. He's a real fighter out there. Like, do not fight him. And John Scott's like, don't fight who? It's like, don't fight DJ King. He's a build heavyweight. He's 6'3", 230. He's going to kill you, kid. Like, don't fight him.
You don't want none of this.
Naturally, John Scott, the reverse psychology works. He fights DJ King. And he says at first he kind of just is grabbing him and they're dancing around. He's not really sure what's going on. And he gets that first right straight to the jaw. And it kind of like snapped him up and it woke him like, whoa, that's what it feels like to get punched. Okay, let me see what it feels like to punch. They go back and forth a little bit. He ends up winning the fight. What he remembers is the two feelings that he had after. First of all, his jaw hurt. That didn't feel good. But his teammates fucking erupted when he knocked this guy out. And he liked that. He really liked that feeling. And he realized, okay, look, I might not be able to contribute goals. I might not be able to contribute assists. What I can contribute is beating the shit out of people and getting my teammates hype.
Every sport has vibes, guys. It is wild that there's one sport where in order to be the vibes guy, you got to beat the shit out of people.
It is the foremost qualification. He has finally learned the way of the goon. He gets it now. And look, that first season, he only gets 1 goal, 5 assists, 107 penalty minutes across 65 games. Year 2, 3 goals, no assists, 184 penalty minutes in 64 games. Those first 2 years, no call up. So he enters year 3, which is make or break season from his promise with his wife, Danielle. He's in the middle of an early season road trip with Houston when he gets the call. Minnesota is in Calgary that night. They need him up there. Get to the closest airport, kid. You're making your NHL debut tonight. He calls his parents. He calls Danielle. He's so excited. He's letting everybody know. He gets to the airport, and he gets to the gate, and they say, your passport, sir. And he goes, fuck, my passport. He was on the road and had zero inclination that he could possibly get called up. And all of Houston's games on this road trip were domestic. So he didn't even consider that he might need his passport. And so this call is not the call. And John Scott, for a brief time, thinks he just blew his only shot at making it to the NHL.
I'm glad that you've already said it's not, because God, that would be fucking depressing if just forgetting your passport. The team doesn't have scans.
Right. I mean, you would think that they would have some kind of backup in place, or like they would have some kind of contingency with major airlines. Like, hey, look, we have our private team plane. If there's any issues with visas or whatever, like, you know, let's apply for this extension. We'll deal with it, blah, blah, blah. There's no such exception. It doesn't exist. So that could have been the moment that it all fell apart. But again, we're talking about one-time All-Stars. So we know that eventually it worked out for him. Almost exactly a month later, this time they're playing in Detroit, and they figured you can't mess this one up, so they call him up again. His first shift on the ice, he hops on, and he sees Pavel Datsyuk skating at him while Nick Lidstrom is holding down the point for the Red Wings. So it's like a very immediate welcome to the NHL moment. For his part, like, he holds his place pretty well in this first season. He plays 20 games with the Wild. He doesn't find the net, but he gets on the scoring sheet with 1 assist and 21 penalty minutes. And, you know, most importantly, in that role as the locker room vibes guy, as the enforcer, the protector, he's shown enough that the Wild are confident in having him in that role for a full season. So He plays the full next season with the Minnesota Wild. And from this point forward, he doesn't go back down to the AHL for the rest of his career, except for one time, which we will get to later in our story. On November 15th, 2009, he gets his first NHL goal. And it's a 5-4 loss against the Carolina Hurricanes, but finally finds the net, gets on the score sheet. The following season, he's a free agent, and he has an offer to go join the reigning NHL champion, Chicago Blackhawks, and he does so on a 2-year deal. There's not a ton that's notable about his time with the Blackhawks, but the one thing that is worth pointing out is even as the new guy, even as a player who is pretty far down on the totem pole, he was elected as the team's union rep, which I think speaks to not only his vibes within the locker room, but also they're going to elect the smart guy in the room. The smart guy in the room is probably the guy who got through 4 years of a mechanical engineering degree. And everybody in the room recognizes that.
And he hasn't taken enough hits yet to stop being the smart guy.
He's still there, exactly. And I mean, honestly, that's part of the benefit of being so big. Like most guys, when he gets in fights, best they can do is like some hard shots to the chest. Nobody's really getting up there. In the second year of his deal, about halfway through, he does get traded. And this is where he does become Xavier, New York Rangers legend, John Scott. Plays 6 games, doesn't register a goal, doesn't register an assist. New York Rangers don't re-sign him. But what an incredible 6 games they were. And for the 2012 offseason, signs a 1-year deal with the Sabres. And it is an incredible 2012-2013 season with the Buffalo Sabres. Plays in 34 games, doesn't score any goals. He doesn't score any assists, but I do have a good feeling that you both know how many penalty minutes he had.
420?
420 would have been the record, I think. Or not quite.
Okay,
maybe that was still Dave Schultz.
And then in that case, 69.
69 penalty minutes across 34 games for John Scott.
Yeah, 2 a game makes more sense than 14. My bad.
Right. That would be like a game misconduct fighting in every single game that he appeared in. How many games do you think a goon in today's NHL could get a game misconduct for like jumping a guy? How many games could he do that in the season before it would be like, okay, like you're done. You're suspended
4.
for the year.
4.
You think 4? Right. The first one's probably just a fine. The second night in a row is like a 3-game suspension. The third is like a 10. And then when he comes back from those 10 games and still is like, I need to just fuck somebody up, then it's probably the season. I think that's fair. It might have been on the basis of that very nice amount of penalty minutes. The Sabres bring him back for another 1-year deal. And on December 27th, 2013, in a game in Toronto, John Scott scored an even strength goal to give him goal number 2 for his NHL career.
Oh, I thought a couple had happened in between there. I didn't realize this was just number 2.
From November 15th, 2009 to December 27th, 2013, between NHL goals for John Scott. That is 4 years, 1 month, and 12 days. I tried to do some research on this. The most games played between goals in NHL history is 255, which is by Ken Danieko of the New Jersey Devils. But that was only 3 years, 8 months, and 16 days between his goals in 1999 and 2002. So while for John Scott, the pure time elapsed only represented about 110 to 120 games, I think we can say with a reasonable degree of certainty that John Scott has the record for the most time elapsed between NHL goals. But I would put an asterisk on that, which is this is an incredibly niche stat, so please prove it wrong if you can. And I think that's part of the beauty of our podcast too, right? I always go back to the bar test, and you know what? Ultimately, guys just shooting the shit at the bar, sometimes they get things wrong. But that sounds close enough to right, so I'll say it confidently.
It feels right.
It feels right in my soul. After that season, he becomes a free agent again, and he signs with the San Jose Sharks. And it must have been something in the water in San Jose, but he becomes a goal-scoring machine. There are sharks in the water, and there are goals in the water, because in this season, he scores 3 goals.
We call that a season-long hat trick, John Scott.
look, just 2 goals in his career, entering 3 in the one season. October 14th, 2014 against the Caps. February 4th, 2015 against the Flames. And he caps it off with the greatest April Fool's joke of all time, scoring against the Avalanche on April 1st, 2015. What a season. Following that, he is a free agent again. And this time he signs with the Phoenix Coyotes, and we get to this infamous season that we all know so very well.
If I had a nickel for every time there was a silly internet campaign for a goon in Arizona to go to the All-Star game.
Well, specifically in Arizona, yeah, you have 2 nickels if it was that. But one thing worth mentioning is they did also try to do this with Rory Fitzpatrick. 2007, people tried to do this campaign for him. Ultimately, it wasn't successful. But this is a thing that people like to do.
There's just something about journeyman blue liners.
It gets people going. It's provocative. One thing that's important to note about John Scott at this point, he is married to Danielle. They have 2 girls, and by the time that the season starts, they know that they have twin girls on the way, due to be born around the All-Star break. So that's going to be a real nice time. John Scott's going to have this nice 2-week break in the middle of the season, be able to go spend some nice downtime with the family, with the 4 children. When All-Star voting opens on the merits, John Scott, no business being included in the All-Star. Played very infrequently through the start of the season, but this was, as we mentioned, the first year of the divisional format, and the NHL made it very clear that the player receiving the most online votes in each division would become the captain of the division. And before it really took off, you got a call from a teammate who said, "Hey, John, you know you're like 30th in fan voting right now, right? Like, you're not close to the top, but like you're not anywhere near the bottom either. You might get voted in." They both laughed about it, and his teammate said, "They'll never let a guy like you play anyway." And he kind of just laughed and agreed. And if only he knew how accurate that teammate was. The NHL quickly saw what they viewed as a farce developing. The fans are making a mockery of our All-Star game. How dare they? And so behind the scenes, they make some calls to John Scott, and they basically direct him to make a public statement trying to downplay the whole thing. Of course, that's exactly what he does. He has a press availability. And he says, "Look, I don't deserve this. My teammates deserve this. Vote for them." And the notable thing about the season for the Coyotes is they were expected to be one of the worst teams in the league, but they actually had a very surprising season. There were young and upcoming players who maybe deserved recognition. So John Scott was accurately being magnanimous and trying to redirect some of that attention to his teammates. But if you know anything about the internet, if you tell the internet to stop doing something, the internet is only going to do that thing 10 times harder now. The campaign strengthens, and by the time January 2nd comes around, when voting closed, John Scott not only had secured the most votes in the Pacific Division to be named as its captain, he had the most votes of anybody in the entire NHL. And let's just remember some of the guys that are in the NHL in 2016. You got Sidney Crosby at the peak of his powers. You got Alex Ovechkin at the peak of his powers. You got Evgeny Malkin. We've got a young Steven Stamkos coming up. But no, the people want John Scott.
I voted for him.
As did I. I think we all did. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably are the exact kind of person who voted for John Scott in the 2016 NHL All-Star Game, even if you don't care about hockey one bit. And you think at this point, it's a done deal. He's the captain. But oh, you question just how much of a shitbag the NHL and Gary Bettman can be. They continued their campaign in private to get John Scott pull out of the game, and he's kind of still on the fence about it. He very much acknowledges, look, I don't really belong in this game. I kind of feel weird about the whole thing. It kind of feels like I'm the joke. And he's on the fence, but then there's one particular line that makes his decision for him. There's somebody from the NHL league office. It wasn't Gary Bettman. It was somebody higher up. That's all we know. But the line that was said to John Scott was, "Do you think this is something your kids would be proud of? When you bring in the man's kids." Dude. Also that. And like when you try to invoke his kids to guilt him into not doing this once in a lifetime thing, John Scott says, "Fuck you to the NHL. I'm not assisting with your campaign to get me out. As far as I'm concerned, I'm in. I was voted in. I'm in. For a little bit, it looks like this act of defiance kind of works. They send him some of his all-star materials. His gloves arrive to the locker room, and he and his teammates are kind of passing around the gloves like, oh my God, look at this. Like, this is real. The GM comes into the locker room and says, hey, John, can we talk? And everybody knows what that is. It's like all of a sudden, untitled meeting from your HR director. Nobody likes getting that meeting invite. He was informed that along with Victor Bartley, he was traded to the Montreal Canadiens in exchange for Jared Tenorti and Stéphane Fournier. To really send home how nothing of a trade this was, Stéphane Fournier doesn't even have a page on Hockey Reference. There is no record of Stéphane Fournier being a hockey player, and yet he was included in this trade for John Scott.
Pepe Sylvia.
Yeah, there is no Stéphane Fournier. There is no Pepe Sylvia. And, I mean, the ramifications are pretty clear and immediate. John Scott's not in the Pacific Division anymore. He's now with the Montreal Canadiens. Not only that, we're going to just really remove any doubt. The Montreal Canadiens, immediately after acquiring John Scott, send him down to the AHL, to St. John's, Newfoundland, which is, in the NHL-AHL system, geographically the furthest east team that there is. So it could not be less specific if they tried. It feels like a very personal fuck you to John Scott to do this. This sparks instant outrage amongst the internet community. But what might ultimately be more important is the outrage that it sparked amongst the players in the NHL, because at this point, John Scott's been around the league a few years. He's been around a lot of different teams. He's begun to earn this reputation within the NHL. Of the quote-unquote goon enforcers, he's more of the type that, in the words of FDR, speak quietly but carry a big stick. That's the kind of goon that John Scott is.
That was Teddy.
Oh, was it Teddy?
Yeah, that was Teddy.
One of those Roosevelt presidents. Along those lines of like, look, I'm out here. I'm a big motherfucker. I don't want to hurt anybody. But if I have to, I will.
They did this to a union rep.
They did this to a union rep. The union will only strengthen when you try to take it out like that. Basically, on the basis of the internet outrage and the players being outraged, the NHL finally publicly announced, yes, John Scott will participate in All-Star Weekend and he will represent the Pacific Division as their inaugural captain. So he flies out for All-Star Weekend. It's the night before the skills competition. So the first day that he's arrived. And he gets a call from that dreaded NHL number. They tell him, Commissioner Bettman is on his way to your hotel. He's going to be in the lobby in 5 minutes. He'd like to speak with you. Click. John Scott jokes in his Player Tribune's article that he thinks he's like about to get whacked. That's very much what the energy of that phone call was. He walks down to the lobby and look, to Gary Bettman's credit, as little as he deserves, in this moment and face-to-face with John Scott, he is very gracious and gives the whole corporate spiel of like, look, we're glad you're here. We hope you have a great weekend. You know, this is a good thing for the sport, blah, 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 blah. The exact opposite of everything that we've been trying to do in private over the past month. None of those things were true, John Scott. Listen, I'm the one that wanted you to play in the All-Star game. These other guys, they really didn't want you to play, but I'm glad you're here. That's the version of events from Gary Bettman. But look, at this point, he's already there. In the skills competition, he does participate in the hardest shot competition, and he doesn't win it. But he also doesn't finish last. 95.9 miles an hour puts him ahead of both Tyler Seguin and Aaron Ekblad. So finished 6th out of the 8 participants.
We do not believe in the if you ain't first, you're last edict. If you're not last, you're a winner.
So this was a good appetizer, which leads us to the main course. And in this new format that the NHL adopted for that season and continues to have, the 2 divisions within the Western Conference face off and the 2 divisions within the Eastern Conference face off. And then the winners of those 2 games meet in an eventual championship game. It's 3-on-3, 3 10-minute periods. Great event. I think it's fantastic what they've been doing. In this first shift, he's back on the ice with a couple of his old Sharks teammates. Got Brian Burns, you got Joe Pavelski out there, and they're holding together a 3-person line. Brian Burns fires it on goal, but he's looking for the deflection from Scott. Scott obliges, he gets a stick to it. It finds its way to the back of the net, and it's not the first goal of the game. The Central Division got a marker already, but it is the Pacific's first goal scored by the captain, John Scott, to make it 1-1. And he completes it with the classic get down on the knee, ice scoop, Selly. But he did it very gracefully. Yes, exactly. Second period, his team is leading. He's sharing the ice with Patrick Kane, again, a former teammate. And he comes in with a very legal, but very nice, especially by All-Star Game standards, body check to Patrick Kane. Flattens him out, and now he's one-on-one with the goalie. He comes down the other way. The goalie makes the save. But he stays on the ice as it comes back down the other way. Patrick Kane's back on his feet now. Patrick Kane scores. And, of course, immediately what he does, look, he just got taken out by John Scott. He's got to go get his lick back. So he skates up to John Scott, throws off his gloves, and they grab each other, and they're ready to go. Everybody in the arena immediately realized, like, okay, this is a joke. This is a very funny thing. Patrick Kane's got a big smile on his face. John Scott's got a big smile on his face. The crowd's going fucking nuts. And John Scott literally just pats him on the head, and then they skate their opposite ways. It's a great moment. A little bit after that, John Scott gets another breakaway opportunity, and this time he converts it. He gets his second goal of the game. This is a man with 5 NHL goals in about a 10-year career. He now has 2 in just 2 periods. His team goes on to win 9-6. So they advance to the final. It's a lot more defensive in this final game. But behind Corey Perry's goal in the second period, the Pacific go on to win the inaugural game of the new NHL All-Star Game format. 1-0. They are the champions. John Scott is an NHL All-Star Game champion. When it came time for the MVP of the All-Star Game to be awarded, the NHL again turned to their social media channels to get the vote out. And they put out different hashtags for the different guys that you could vote for All-Stars. So you could do hashtag Kane All-Star, hashtag Taves All-Star, hashtag Perry All-Star, hashtag Pavelski All-Star. But the NHL, it was very much like that SpongeBob meme. How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
They had to know.
There's at least a small part of them that had to know. But it's a cast of characters that get in on it. Notably, active players at the time, Henrik Lundqvist gets in on the campaign. Also, the official team accounts of the Flyers, the Canucks, the Senators, and the Oilers all joined in, tweeting out hashtag Scott NHL MVP to vote for John Scott. Wouldn't you know it, as a write-in candidate, not even one of the people listed, the NHL realized they had no choice but to announce as the MVP of the 2016 NHL All-Star Game, John Scott. The moment that he gets named it, it's hilarious to watch it back because he kind of like laughs when they say it at first. And then his teammates kind of like tap him. He's like, oh shit, like actually? So he skates out, he accepts the All-Star Game MVP. And he also gets to accept the $1 million check for the winning team from Gary Bettman. And I got to give credit to the PA announcer here because he does a really good job of he's like, walking out with the $1 million check for tonight's winning team is NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman. And he, about 2 seconds, and the crowd starts booing like crazy. He's like, and John Scott's coming to accept it. And the crowd goes wild.
Pay no attention to the 2 seconds of radio silence you just heard on the broadcast.
Yeah, Commissioner Bettman has a 99% approval rating. Please ignore. But there's obviously, he gets interviewed by Pierre Maguire after this as the MVP. And really cool moment as he's given an answer. He said, how are you going to split the money up? And he said, oh, well, I think I'm going to keep the full $1 million. These guys are getting paid enough anyway. Very tongue-in-cheek. But Burns and Pavelski, his former Sharks teammates, skated over to lift him up on their shoulders, which to me was the most impressive achievement of the entire weekend. Because to lift a 6'8", 260-pound man,
he's big.
But to do that on land is impressive enough. To do this on ice skates, is like literally unfathomable to me. I cannot keep myself up on ice skates. That interview was incredible. Another one that was incredible was, look, obviously, this was the thing that kind of divided the NHL community at large. It became a hot take issue. Jeremy Roenick was a person who was particularly kind of outspoken against it, saying, this is an honor for players that deserve it, blah, blah, blah. This is a joke. This is a farce. And in one of the greatest decisions ever made by any producer, I don't know who the producer was for this broadcast by the NBC, but as John Scott was sitting on 2 goals in that first game, they sent Jeremy Roenick down to interview him. And Jeremy Roenick was trying to be as graceful as possible and prefacing his question. He's like, John, look, I was one of the biggest critics of this, but I have to admit, this is incredible. To see this crowd behind you is incredible. What does it mean to be down here? And the first thing out of John Scott's mouth is like, look, well, Jeremy, it's not the first time you've been wrong, and it won't be the last, so I'm not too worried about that. But Jeremy Roenick, you can just see on his face, he's got the joke smile, but he also has the eyes of I want to fucking kill you, but I know I can't because there's literally a camera on us right now. An incredible moment and an incredible weekend for John Scott. After the dust settles from this, first of all, I mentioned those 2 twins that were going to be born All-Star weekend. They were born about a week after the All-Star game, healthily delivered, family of 4 now. But as that happens, he still has to go back and play in the AHL now. So he plays out 27 games for St. John's. He nets 2 goals, 2 assists to go with 85 penalty minutes. But on April 5th, the Montreal Canadiens wanted to do right by him. So they called him up for one more NHL game. Got 3 shots on goal, 7 hits, which seems like he was really having a go out there.
It sounds like he knew it was one last NHL game.
And only the 2 penalty minutes. So of those 7, at least 6 were clean hits. Coming off of this, he didn't enter this season ever thinking that he wanted it to be his last season. But as he now enters this offseason, it's kind of all coming for him. He's like, okay, look, am I ever going to get a real much better moment than the one I just had? I now have 4 kids. I'm 33 years old. My brain still works pretty much. Maybe this is a good time to get out. So he does, and he retires from the NHL at the age of 33. According to John Scott himself, for his whole NHL career, he got in 42 fights. And he says he only ever lost 1. He concedes that Justin Johnson of the Islanders got the best of him. And I just, real quick, brief aside about Justin Johnson. He had a 14-year professional hockey career. He played 2 games in the NHL. And he had played his first game in the NHL just 2 days prior to that fight with John Scott. So, this was the definition of just a cup of coffee guy. He had his one shining moment, his one chance to fight John Scott. And he did fucking floor him with a left hook.
He probably enjoyed that 2016 All-Star game run as much as anything. He's like, yeah, I knocked out an All-Star.
Yeah, exactly. You just layers of separation away from fighting Patrick Kane. I mean, you're really right there. And I looked up a good amount of his fights on YouTube. I didn't watch all of them. I will say I watched at least 15, and I would say John Scott did win every one that I watched. So, he wants to claim he went 41-1. I believe it. I'm not arguing with it. You can argue with him if you want to. I'm not going to.
I don't want to make it 42-1, so I'll agree with him.
Exactly. Today, he is now the father of 7 girls. No
Jesus,
sons,
dude.
7 girls. There was a movie in development based on his life. The last update that I was able to find on it was around December 2019. It was about to finish casting. And then we all remember what happened about 3 months after that. I don't see anywhere confirmed that officially scrapped the movie. That is my sneaking suspicion at this point, that if we still haven't seen that movie and we haven't gotten any more updates, I do think that it probably is not going to exist.
This is the worst thing COVID ever took from us.
By far. I will storm the Michigan Capitol to ensure that movie rights get dispersed to somebody that will actually honor this film of this great Michigan man. No, I wouldn't actually do that. And it also wouldn't make sense because he's not in Michigan anymore. As of this most recent season, actually, he's back in Chicago. NBC Sports Chicago signed him to be an analyst on their pre and post game shows. So he's back in the NHL world finally, all these years later. Back being a part of that world that gave him this incredible moment all those years ago. In closing, I think we can ask ourselves, what is John Scott's legacy ultimately? He's this goon, but he's also this engineer. He's this union rep. He was kind of this joke that turned into the greatest moment in 21st century All-Star Game history. There's a lot of things that you could say, but I think if we want to say the legacy question, I want to leave you with what he wrote in his final Players Tribune article regarding what he would like to be inscribed in his tombstone. And I quote, "Here lies John Scott. He tried not to be a dick, and he was a good dad. Let me add one last line to that tombstone. He was a hell of a guy."
Hell of a guy. And I mean, his record stands for himself. There's not much more to say. He's a tough guy to go up against. I guess I had hoped with Wauters to kind of zag on the one-time All-Star a little bit by having this incredibly successful player who happens to be a one-time All-Star. But you're right that that doesn't make it very much about the All-Star game, nor does Timana Tahu.
Timana Tahu. That's right. It's Aboriginal, so it's fine.
Neither of those cases were about the All-Star game. And you came, Diaz, with the fire of this is a one-time All-Star. We're going to talk about the All-Star game. And I got to say, we've recently seen a hockey All-Star game and an NBA one. And the NHL's is still pretty fun. And the NBA one sucks. The NBA one just sucks. They scored 200 points and it was terrible. And you know what this proves? Is that the way to fix the NBA one is, okay, you get all your All-Stars. Each league should be electing one guy, or each conference, to go to the All-Star game who's going to play slightly harder defense and just show up to make everyone care a little bit about it. Not even quite six man.
We had this happen and we banned that person for life from the hall.
No. I'm not saying there's a separate voting. There's the All-Star starters, and then there's also just a category for dude that is not an All-Star but needs to go there. So not quite like Turkey coming in and crashing, but I really hope Mehmet Okur is Turkish now that I've said that.
He is indeed Turkish.
Okay, nailed it.
Here's what the NBA should do. You take the 24 people that normally play in the Rising Stars All-Star game, and you take the 24 people that play in the traditional All-Star game, and you have two super teams, and you have these 24 Rising Stars that really want to fucking prove themselves against the top guys. And you have these top guys that are this is kind of cute. Look at these guys. Oh, they're trying so hard. Fuck, it's close in the fourth quarter. Okay, let's actually dominate them now. That would be a great product. And especially if they do a little bit too much fuck around before they get to the find out, that's a game I would want to watch. Give me Victor Wembanyama.
Make it 4 All-Star teams, because the NBA only has 24 All-Stars compared to 44 for the NHL, which is still not enough, and 60 plus for Major League Baseball, because they at least have the right idea of this covers everyone who has had a good season.
And they still felt the need to have 2 games back in the day. My God, baseball.
That's why it's our pastime.
I mean, I think we're beating around the bush a little bit here this time. I think it feels like John Scott is going to kind of just... Oh.
Hey, I do want to say...
Yes, please.
This topic was not talk about how much of an impact on one specific All-Star game was happened. The topic was one-time All-Stars. And Wauters is the opposite route of someone extremely successful who only had 1 All-Star. Timana Tahu, also someone very successful, 1 All-Star. John Scott, he has been recognized way more than his level of play ever deserved. And let's just accept that. He is an All-Star MVP because teammates and other players fell in love with the idea of this goon becoming an All-Star. It is more than his career ever deserved. He just happened to be the lucky one that fans and players got behind. He was special for pretty much no reason other than that's just who fans chose. And I want that to be said because he has already been honored more than he deserves. And that is nothing against John Scott. It is just, if you look at John Scott's career, there are a million John Scotts. It's just, this is the one that the internet got behind and like, yes, this is the one who we love. And as Diaz said, they've done it before. So if the two of you are going to vote for John Scott, that's fine. But I'm saying this is going to be another honor for John Scott that is outsized compared to his actual contributions to any sport. And again, John Scott in the top 1% of people in the world because of his being able to make the NHL. But if you took John Scott's career and just did a search on Hockey Reference for people with the same like games played and 5 goals, I'm sure there are thousands and thousands who have had as much of an impact on actual hockey. He just happened to be the one that people got behind for internet memes. And then because the NHL tried to stop him, made it as popular as it was, and and other NHL players trying to support him. It has almost nothing to do with John Scott himself as an actual player and what he did in the NHL. And again, I'm fine with the two of you voting for him, but I do want that to be known that it could have been literally anybody.
I just have one question. Who is that guy that was in that one NHL All-Star game?
It could be literally anybody. The NHL does not give a lot of All-Stars.
Who was that guy that was in that one NHL All-Star game? It's John Scott.
Because of internet memes. Like I said, I've resigned myself to the fact that you two are going to vote for him.
Well,
I think James went away from on Wauters way too much. I would have voted for her over John Scott.
Well,
we had an entire episode where the theme was guys who are only popular because of the internet. So if we're now going to say that we must scorn
we also
John
talked
Scott.
about a very similar player in that one.
Yes, he's just Biz Nasty Part 2. This is the thing. I'm saying, like, he is more internet meme than someone whose actual career was worthy of one All-Star appearance.
But he's not Biz Nasty because Biz Nasty calls the attention upon himself, whereas John Scott has the attention thrown upon him.
It was a literal meme come to life that gave this career minor leaguer a one-time All-Star appearance where, because the NHL was trying to block it so hard, everyone then wanted to end up celebrating him specifically at this thing. And that celebration was way more than 99.999% of players with similar careers will have ever gotten. And John Scott has gotten this type of recognition, like I said, way more than his career would lead to in a normal circumstance. Again, if you want to vote for him, I'm fine with it. But this is another instance of deciding that John Scott is worth more than John Scott's output has given.
I want to make one point real quick, just to the career minor leaguer. I'm looking at these career stats. He absolutely, by everything I'm looking at, from the NAHL, WCHA, that's college. We're not even fucking counting college. AHL and NAHL played way more games in the NHL than either of those two combined. So I'd like a career journeyman. We don't need to say career minor leaguer. With that, look, Xavier, hey, sell me on me being right originally with Ann Wauters. If we feel this passionately, like, convince me I was right all along.
I mean, I think you were right because you talked about someone who had great success and had a very interesting career and won titles in multiple countries, but in the country that we think about because we're Americans, was only ever recognized as an all-star one time because of the insane distribution of talent, or concentration of talent, I should say, in the early WNBA, and the minimum number of people that they recognized as all-stars in comparison to the actual talent that they had.
To be fair, higher proportion of WNBA players get to make the All-Star game versus NBA players, but still very, very, very low. Your point is taken. I mean, I like Ann Wauters very much. I had very little to say about that All-Star game. I think if her appearance had been a little bit more interesting, maybe she'd been a starter and not just like a reserve who only played 12 All-Star minutes. Like, I got to give it to John Scott. He's got more All-Star time.
I will say that John Scott has barely more actual NHL games than minor leagues. And if you include juniors, he has more juniors and minors than NHL games.
Okay,
Like that is a fact.
I'm gonna make a procedural appeal. Do the prompts matter, or are they just a box that we have to tick along the way? That's my procedural point. Because if the prompts don't matter, then I'll take that into consideration the rest of the way, and I will find somebody who the prompt is just a slight little footnote that I can just mention in passing in my presentation, and we'll move on. But if the prompt is important, and the prompt is what matters, and the prompt is what we are supposed to discuss about as it relates to the guy that we are bringing up for that week, then it's far and away John Scott of these three.
I mean,
like, it's
the
not
prompt
even
matters. I just don't think John Scott is good. I think he's gotten way more than
That's
he
like
than
the
he
point
should
of
get.
what this podcast is.
You don't have to be
Should I
good to
bring up
be a
Sidney
guy.
Crosby next week? Like, what are we doing?
No, I mean, I'm saying I don't think he deserves this, and I don't think it's interesting and good. Like, I think I'm fine with you talking about it, but I think that John Scott does not deserve to be recognized in this hall because John Scott has gotten more than he deserves.
Okay, Jeremy Roenick. Okay, Jeremy
Hey,
Roenick.
I did not say it was not fun that John Scott got to do that. I think it is very fun that John Scott got to do that. I think that is where we leave it. Because John Scott got to do this thing that many other NHL players, much better than John Scott, will never get to experience. And I think that is where, like, John Scott's recognition ends. Like, how many other NHL players of that caliber will ever have that level of recognition? I would like to recognize someone that hasn't gotten that recognition, which is why I like Wauters, why I like Timana Tahu. Again, I'm fine with you two deciding to do this, but I'm saying this will be the second time in John Scott's career where the internet has recognized him for memes. But I think that's about it. So Diaz, you can go ahead and do your thing on this.
I mean, James looks in contemplation. I do leave the final word with James.
I want to say Xavier's point is correct. There are players in every sport that should get acknowledged as all-stars as didn't. Like, it's I think of baseball, for instance, like it was for all these years the idea that Nick Markakis had not been an all-star, and thankfully did eventually with Atlanta, but like all those years in Baltimore not doing it. And it does piss you off when someone like Ty Wigginton, sticking with the Orioles, like makes it one year because he hits 20 home runs, and I think he hits like 24 on the season, but happened to have 20 by the midway break. And so just fucking lucks into it, and this goofy dude just takes the spot of like someone that's better. And I like agree that is frustrating. And I'm someone who cares about all-star games probably more than one should or the average person does. Like, I do believe that all-star appearances matter. And like, I believe that because they seem to, you know, even if the NBA players don't care about the game itself, like they do seem to truly care about those all-star game appearances, as does everyone in every sport. Like, that matters. And if the players seemed to feel differently about John Scott, I think I would be swayed by this. Ultimately, while Xavier is correct in that there are many players better than John Scott who will never get that honor, there are thousands of NHL players in the history of the league, like Xavier's described, like that would have that kind of a meager output, who would not be able to dream of such a thing because, you know, the internet didn't exist however many decades ago. And this has been going on for however long the NHL All-Star Game has been going on. And there was a singular moment where, like, not everything on the internet was awful, and it coalesced around this one dude who, yes, has a very similar career to many other schlubs. And the schlubs got one. And for what it's worth, the stars all seem to be pretty happy for the schlub. Like, the stars seem to be pretty fucking jazzed that a schlub got a shot. And I have to imagine the other players that weren't necessarily there, I'm sure there were some sitting at home that were upset. But I'd like to believe that most kind of had that same attitude. I do believe in the end that while this is a very different interpretation of what I took from one-time All-Star with Wauters, the fact that he's going out on the All-Star game pretty much like one other NHL appearance ever after this before riding off into the sunset. Yeah, it's a similar story to even guys that are in this hall right now, but it's a story well told, and I think it has my support.
Well, I appreciate that, James. And also, Xavier, I appreciate your dissent. It is meaningful. And as an olive branch, I'll already say next week, best no-time all-stars. Let's find those guys that were better than John Scott and deserve to be memorized and memorialized. But for right now, we're going to focus on the one-time NHL All-Star Game MVP, just a kid from Edmonton that grew up a Bruins fan and had the same stick as Raymond Bourque. But he has something that Raymond Bourque will never have, which is a spot within this hall. Welcome to the Hall of Guy, John Scott.
Who is now 42-1 after this victory. I'll go ahead and give it to him. Congratulations to John Scott. Congratulations to you all for getting through another one of these. We appreciate everyone that helps make that happen. Of course, producer Craig, the coders behind him, and our musical director, Don Ham, for that lovely theme music. After a little bit of a break, we're going to try and get back on the guys of the day. Most days, I'm just not going to commit to it daily for a little bit, but most days we will continue to have guys of the day available on our Discord, at the Blue Sky, all those good things that you can find at bit.ly/rememberthatguy. That is also a very easy way to share the show if you know anyone that you think would enjoy this. If you have anyone in your life like that, I don't know why you haven't already sent us along to that. Get on it. This is not a one-way relationship. We need some assistance here. We don't. We just appreciate you joining us. Thank you, most of all, listener. Anything else for you guys?
I don't think so. Orioles beat the Phillies in spring training today. Congratulations.
Goddamn right they did. Jackson Holliday had 3 hits, including a double off Zach Wheeler. I've been waiting for a chance to say it. Thank you for setting me up for that. I have been one of your hosts, James.
I've been the very special guest Xavier.
And I'm Diaz. And to our South American listeners, don't guy for me, Argentina. The truth is, I never left you.
One last baseball story about Jessie that I want to share. I was telling her about the Shohei Ohtani wedding news because she's like, he is a baseball player she knows the name of. And after I was on the story, I was like, hun, I'm curious. Can you name any other baseball player? Like, this isn't me saying that with anger. Like, I'm just genuinely curious. Can you name another baseball player? She thinks for a while. Gunnar Henderson. I was like, there you go. There you go. That's one. She's like,
lovely.
I thought his name was Al for a little bit. And I was like, huh? It's like, yeah, there's a billboard when I'm coming down 83. And I thought it was saying his name was Al, Rookie of the Year.
Oh my God. I love that.
And I was like, oh, but now I get that it's Gunnar.